This episode of the Central Valley Music Educators podcast is sponsored by J.H. Tackett Marketing in Hanford. They offer worldwide printing at your fingertips. Find out more at jhtacketmarketing.com.
Welcome to the Central Valley Music Educators Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Bentley. On this week's show, we're talking with educator and coach Bethany Hansen. You can follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google, YouTube, or wherever you download your favorite shows. You can also listen on our website at cvmepodcast.com. I'd like to welcome to the show Dr. Bethany Hansen, who has been a friend of mine for years. She was a band director in Hanford who has since relocated to the Idaho area and has gone into the world of higher education and coaching educators. She's also a fellow podcaster. Her show is called The Mindset for Life. How are you doing, Bethany?
I'm doing great, Rob. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Hey, can you tell us a little bit about your background in education?
Oh, yeah, I would be happy to. I was a music teacher in Idaho and then Hanford, moved to Visalia, taught in Woodlake, then moved to Boise. So I taught 21 years in public schools. And I've been in higher education for about 13 years now. Some of that overlapped. My husband's also an educator, so we talk a lot about education at my house. And now I'm moved up into an associate dean role, and I'm also a professional life, career, and executive coach.
So you've taught music at all these different levels, and you've definitely done a lot of research about current trends in education and the effect that it's had on educators lately. Why do you want to help others through your website and your podcast?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, the normal job we do as educators is a pretty demanding job. Any kind of position where you're serving other people and giving a lot to others can be draining all by itself. But in the world we live in today, that VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world that's ever-changing, definitely demands a different skill set. And I don't think we have enough support as adults once we become adults to continue growing and managing stress and all of that sort of thing. So I really love the work educators do. I believe in it. That's why I dedicated my life to that also. And I love to help other people become more resilient in that pursuit.
So on your website, drbcoach.com, you offer up some great tips for educators, including a special segment about having difficult conversations with parents. How have you seen teachers struggling in this area, and what tips might you offer our listeners?
Oh, I'd love to share that. Difficult conversations are pretty common, especially if we're facing someone who is accusing or hostile or has a complaint about something we're doing. It could be minor, it could be big, but it activates an emotional response in us. And we often approach that conversation thinking we have to have answers right now, and we have to have the right answer, or that we have to fix the thing that's happening. So tips I like to give folks on difficult conversations are, first of all, that we don't have to know everything, and we can even come to the conversation with an attitude that we don't have to have any answers at all. So we can approach that conversation as a total learner, which puts us in a place of humility and less likely to react emotionally. We can listen. We can come back to the conversation later after we've heard the person and what they have to say. If we want to share things with them, we can, of course, offer and invite what we would like to say and give them time to think about it and reschedule a follow-up conversation. But the first thing I like to share with people is coming at that conversation with an attitude of not having to have answers. And we just may learn something new from that person that changes our perception of what happened. The other thing is remembering that everyone has their own schema of understanding in life and their own perceptions, and exploring that with the other person can really help to find out what our impact is before we're directing them or telling them we need them to do something for us. So 2 things in difficult conversations to help keep things on track. But that last thing, the third step, would be to also come back to a conversation that's difficult. There's no need to resolve everything in one moment. There's always time to come back and resolve it later when you've had time to calm down, think about it, and formulate a good answer.
So I know you do a lot of coaching, not only with educators, but business professionals. And I know that one of the things that comes up quite often is time management and having time for life. If you forgive me, life balance, probably an overused term, but it really is a balance, isn't it?
Definitely. And actually, there's a new phrase going around that it's not work-life balance anymore. It's work-life blending. Like, you have your real life when you're at work. And that does happen. It's not just a separate place, right? And especially with so many people working online, I think that's a truth.
So I know along with work-life balance and things that are associated with that, there's a lot of stress that's put on educators, and they have to be able to deal with it in rational terms with family, colleagues, friends. What are some tips that you might offer up to our listeners?
I love talking about stress response, in fact, and stress management. It's most of what I coach people on, even though folks will come to me wanting to talk about advancing a career or perfecting their performance or whatever they want to do. It almost always comes down to stress management and stress response. So I do want to talk about that a little bit and first frame that in two ways. The first one is there's the regular job, right? Like, I think when I was teaching high school band a few years back, there was this idea like the results have to go in front of the public and the parents and all these people. We might be marching that band in front of a big audience, and we really do need to produce some kind of result, and we can put a lot of pressure on ourselves, a lot of pressure on the kids. That's all part of the regular job. And of course, some educators have a spouse or family members that might be part of that and come along and support that whole thing. Or there might be no connection there. Maybe your work and your life are really separate and you don't have those folks in your life coming along. So there's that normal sense of this is the job and there's stress associated with that. But then there's that VUCA world we're living in where there's volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. It describes this space that we're living in where there's constant, unpredictable change. It's the norm now. And in some industries outside of education, there is constant change in terms of people's roles are changing like by the month. They might be laid off tomorrow. There's so much going on that could impact an individual, and that definitely bleeds into the education space. It influences everything we do when we're educators. So stress response, I like to think of, this may sound like a really strange metaphor, but it's like a little puppy. The amygdala in our brain is the part of our brain that controls the fight, flight, or freeze response. So something is inviting us to react instead of responding the way we'd like to. And that part of the brain takes over everything, and it interrupts the prefrontal cortex so we can't think clearly and make good decisions. It's just our heart rate's going up, all these things are happening, and we may have a lot of thoughts, but they're coming from that unpredictable part of the brain. So I like to think about training that brain that sort of acts like a little puppy. It wants to go where it wants to go, and taming that. A couple of ways to do that are first to notice when it's happening. Like we might be in a classroom, we might be on a field trip, we might be at a band review, wherever we are, we can sense our body getting tense. We can sense our heart rate increasing, and we can even notice our own words start to get louder, more intense. We might be talking faster, and we might be feeling all that stress building up before we realize it's happening. And the first thing to do is to interrupt it and to actually slow down the body. It could be just to shut the eyes and breathe slowly for 4 seconds, in and out real slow. And it could also be to wiggle your toes in your shoes, as strange as that may sound, and fully notice your feet in your shoes to distract your brain and just get control of, here I am right now in my body, and right now there's no threat. The brain thinks there's a saber-toothed tiger out there, but it's just a band review. It's just a kid with a question or whatever it is. So interrupting that will help slow it down, and then we can now use our higher processing and our higher thinking again and more intentionally do what we want to do. So taming that amygdala hijack is the number one thing. And then the other thing is kind of a two-part deal. Thinking about what is within our control that we can do, So we can take action. And that's just thinking about your locus of control. A lot of times we think we have control over a lot more than we really do. So noticing what we can control and letting go of what we can't. And the other thing is what we like to call cognitive reframing. Like we might see something as a really horrible thing that's happening when we could reframe that into a gift or opportunity. There could be a potential future outcome that may be better than we're seeing, and we can choose to believe in good things to come. Whether or not they actually happen is irrelevant. It's that openness to like, okay, this may not be the end of the world. This might lead to something I just don't know about right now. So cognitive reframing is that space of seeing a perspective outside of the present moment and being able to believe in the fact that we just might not know everything about what's going to happen. And then resilience skills come into that too. Resilience building skills for educators could be things like going home and doing a little exercise. Research shows that exercise is the number one thing to get our brain off the day, refresh, recharge, and also elevate our mood. So we could do that. Could be a walk at lunchtime, get away from the classroom, whatever that might be. And then there's also a lot of research out there telling us that emotions are just chemicals triggered by our brain. So when we have a thought, we have the emotion that's really intense, really strong. It might be seriously negative. It's just chemicals flowing through the body that literally dissolve within 90 seconds. So if we can distract ourselves for the 90 seconds and let that emotion kind of run its course, then we can take a deep breath and move on. 90 seconds feels like forever though. So it seems like it's lasting a long time when really it's going to go. If we can just slow down and recognize, okay, it's just 90 seconds. I can deal with fear for 90 seconds. I can deal with anxiety for 90 seconds. I can deal with anything unpleasant for 90 seconds. It's hard, but with some practice and intentional thinking, like that's going to pass, we can get through stress responses a lot faster. So those are some things that I like to just throw out there. What do you think about those? Do you think they could be useful in teaching situations or in stress that teachers face?
I definitely think those are useful. I was just sitting there wiggling my toes. I was totally
Nice.
trying it. It's been a heck of a week. We have festivals, going on. I had concerts, fundraisers, all these other things, and I know that I'm totally going to try some of those things. I do a lot of breathing. I'll do that. True confessions here, listeners. I walked out to my car in the parking lot at break for like 10 minutes just to do some breathing exercises because I was at that point where and it wasn't even most of it was not school related. It was some personal things going on and I just needed to take a break. It was pouring rain, went out to my car, just did some breathing exercises, and it really helped. And, Bethany, one of the things that we like to do on the show is there are so many new educators in our area here in California, and with the passage of Prop 28, we're going to see a huge influx of people coming out of college who maybe haven't had teacher ed classes, and they're going to be expected to be doing their interning during their first year of teaching. As a former band teacher and now a coach, what tips could you offer some of our newer teachers that are just starting out their career, some things that they can look past and move on?
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, one of those things, I think new parents face this too when their children are starting to become more capable, more verbal, and more willful. And it's that idea that we can invite, we can encourage, but we cannot control other people. Like the only person we can change is ourselves, right? So a new teacher in the classroom may feel like they need to make a student comply or make a student behave or find a way to make that behavior fixed, when actually it's perfectly fine to teach children, to guide children, and let them experience the consequences of their own behavior just fine. There's never a time where we have to have perfect behavior in a classroom. Another thing is to just start where you are. It can be really tempting to try to be an amazing teacher the very first year, want to do everything perfectly that you think you should be doing, and that's a recipe for burnout. I still remember the one teacher at an elementary school in Hanford. When I was teaching there, this young man had, it was his first year teaching. He had the most perfect classroom I've ever been in my life. Everybody was calm, quiet. There was a beautiful mood in there. He was on top of every minute. He had routines for everything, and he quit in December. I would go in there for recorder class. We're playing the little fourth grade instruments, and he would participate, but he quit because he felt high pressure overwhelm. He was bringing it to himself. As a first year teacher, he didn't need to be perfect. He didn't need all of that control. He just needed a basic foundation. And then the next year he could have built on that. But he expected himself to be amazing all at once. And that's a recipe for burnout, so that's one thing. The other thing I would say is from the coaching perspective is this acronym PERMA. And it's something that we could remember as new teachers, as experienced teachers, and just as adults living in the world. PERMA stands for positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning or mattering, and achievement. And we need all 5 of those things to have a happy, satisfying life. We also need them in our career. So P, the positive emotions is that optimism piece of believing that something positive could come in the future. No matter how hard it feels or overwhelming it feels, something good can be coming in the future. And even if it doesn't come, that's okay. Having that belief that it could be possible is the positive emotions piece. The E, the engagement, that's your whole concept of flow. Like, when was the last time you got really lost in an activity, totally immersed in it, really losing track of time? Some of the research tells us now that that's what we have to do outside of work to relieve stress. And for most people, it's the kinds of activities you used to do as a teenager. For me, that's playing my trumpet, actually, or playing my piano, getting out there and doing the things that I thought were fun when I was a teenager. For my husband, it might be playing piano or tying flies or doing model airplanes. Everybody's got their own thing, but whatever that is, if you get absorbed in it, that's the engagement piece. The R, the relationships, that is a space where you have to be seen and known and understood and loved by other people. For some people, that's your family. For others, it might be a professional community. Maybe you find a colleague at work that you really hit it off with and you kind of understand each other. So you get that R, that positive relationship immersion from that person or those people, whoever they might be. The meaning and mattering, this is where I think the brain plays tricks on us. We have to look around for evidence that we matter, like that something we're doing has an impact or makes a difference, and we have to collect it. And it's sort of a subconscious thing we always do, just on autopilot. But we consciously sometimes pay attention to the negative anti-examples, like, I tried that and it didn't make a difference. My kid didn't listen to me. My spouse is arguing with me, or whatever I'm trying to do doesn't seem to matter. But there's all this other evidence out there that what we're doing is making a difference, that it is mattering, that it is succeeding. And so we have to sort of tame the conscious brain of noticing all the negative stuff and really gather those amazing examples of where we do have meaning, where we do matter, where we do have an impact. And that's especially important for any new teacher who's more likely to be seeing what they're not good at, right? And what they lack. Let's see, that was the M, and the last one's the A. That's achievement. You have to have something in your life that you are really great at. It could be something you start as an adult, or it could be some skill you've developed your whole life. Like, Rob, I know you're really good at jazz, right? That's not something I'm good at. If I'm going to pick up my horn and try to play in a jazz band, sticking strictly to the chart would be my gift, and I would feel amazing there. But if I'm going to try to improvise, it's going to suck. It's going to be terrible. So I'm not going to get the A from that. But if I want to play Haydn's Trumpet Concerto, I'm going to feel accomplished there. I've been playing that one for 25 years and I could feel great. So we have to have some things that we're really good at. And especially when we're new teachers, we're going to have something outside of teaching to be looking at for a while until we have a collection of stuff we've really mastered and gotten great at there. So yeah, that's PERMA. Comes from a man named Martin Seligman. He's a positive psychology researcher. There's a lot out there around it. I encourage your listeners to check it out because Finding happiness in life is a pursuit we all have, and kind of having a framework for that can be really helpful, especially in the VUCA world that we're living in right now.
Her website is Dr.B Coach, drbcoach.com, and she is Bethany Hansen. Bethany, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to re-listen to this episode like 15 times because I heard so much good stuff, and I know our listeners are really going to appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rob. Take care of yourself.
Well, friends, this wraps up season 3 of the show. I'll be taking a few weeks off before starting the show back up for the final push to the end of the school year. Season 4 will begin on April 11th with a big show about all of the music teaching jobs opening up around the valley. If you have openings in your district, please contact me so that I can add them to the list. I might even ask you to come on the show to recruit some great candidates that might be interested in a position that you're offering. I'd like to thank J.H. Tackett Marketing in Hanford for sponsoring this episode of the Central Valley Music Educators Podcast. If you're interested in sponsoring a future episode of the show or have a show topic that you'd be interested in hearing about, please contact me at cvmepodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving a review, sharing on social media, or telling a friend. For more information about the show, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube at Central Valley Music Educators Podcast or at CVME Podcast. Have a great week.